Seems like this barge has a tremendous history. As Ken's telling me, it's from 1840, and it was a working barge in the New York City East River, the fish market area, the wholesale fish market, and it was brought to my attention. I'm going to let the people who really have loved this, tried to move this along, and now we're deciding we got to really move it along and see if we can retain this barge for the, for the rest of our history that's coming. So the Coaches twins, Joe and Jack, took me to Fairhaven to see this piece of history that Jack Coaches found on just one of his musings. He likes to spend time. He worked at Mystic for 25 years. He's an expert in commercial wooden boats, so he knows a lot about them. So naturally, he likes to peruse, walk around, relax, enjoy marinas. So he was walking, he'll tell you when, he was walking through the marina, and he spies this piece of history, this barge that dates back to 1840, and he was very surprised and excited and exhilarated. And ever since that time, he has tried to find a way of moving this barge to a place where it can be restored and then have it for posterity. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is the oyster barge in Fairhaven at the marina. And Ken Call will fill you in on lots of history of it that he's spent time learning about. And so let's start with the Coaches brothers telling us about. Why don't you tell the whole audience about this barge that Jack found and why he was so excited and what they were?
Well, I'll answer for my brother if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
He, as you said, worked for Mystic Seaport, and he was always interested in the oyster boats that sailed and did the work on Long Island Sound. And when he was doing some searching around for some maritime material, he was very surprised because he did not know that any existed. So he found out that this particular barge, which is really on land now, you would never know it was a floating barge because they took it from South Street Seaport area all the way to New Haven and to a marina there where they cut out, I guess you would say, a little canal 70 feet by about 23 or 24 feet, and that's about the size of the oyster barge. And they put it into this area, and they filled in all of the soil around it, so that when you were to drive by, you would think it was a house on top of.
And what were they going to do with it? And what was the use
it was
for
used
a while?
as Jack. Was it used as a bar?
It was a bar.
Yeah,
it was a bar.
That's why you went there originally.
No.
That's not supposed to be told.
So it was being used as a bar restaurant?
It was used as a bar or restaurant, yes.
When you found it, were they still doing that? Was it still functioning?
No.
Okay, so it had left that life. So
Yes.
So it's on more than its second life.
It was a dive bar.
Dive bar. But originally you told me that all these barges were lined up on the East River, side by side, hundreds of them, right? Is everybody going to give me some help on this? Because I've seen pictures.
About 40 altogether.
About 40?
Yeah.
And where the wholesale business was done out of these barges.
Right.
So they just sat there, Ken. They were moored. They sat there. That the boats would bring the oysters in. Is that what happens?
Right,
And then
exactly.
off these barges, they're stationary. I mean, they're tied up
Well,
to the dock.
the barges served as a conduit, if you will, because even though New York City was a port, it was still a pretty busy port. And the barge owners found that rather than have some dock space that would be driving you crazy and be very expensive, they would park a 20-foot wide, 80-foot long barge head to tail, so that 80 feet away from the dock was a place where the schooners with the oysters would come in and unload.
Tell them, where did the schooners come from?
The schooners came from the whole East Coast. They went as far as north of Boston, as far as south as Washington, D.C., and New York City had an appetite for oysters you wouldn't believe. 6 million
I heard people
a day.
used to eat them like we eat frankfurters. They used to just eat them up, right? It was a big part of their diet.
6 million a day in New York City.
6 million a day. We're being eaten, supplied, and eaten. So, because people have to understand that, so there were 40 of these barges, and then Jack told us how they were constructed on the top, that they don't go straight up and down.
Right.
They have that very unique.
Yes. What's that term for that, Jack?
Tumble home.
Tumble
Tumble
home.
home.
And that was because
The size of the barge itself normally would have been straight up like any building, but because there were other barges right close to them, and the water might be rough, if the boat moved a bit or they all moved, they would hit the tops of the building would hit each other. So they had to build it so that it was in an angle.
Right.
So the top would be smaller than the bottom, and if there was rough weather, it could move around, and the boats would not hit each other.
right, so that's the distinctive thing about it. So when you look at pictures of them, you can see it right away. Well, now this one ends up. I don't know. Does anybody know how it ended up in Fairhaven? Does anybody have that?
It was bought by a oyster person called Ernest Ball, but it was not. It was more like he was in the business, and the business was dying. So he bought the barge because of his connections, more than likely anything else. He actually brought 3 of them to Fairhaven. 2 of them were dismantled for their parts and left, and the keels are visible still in the Quinnipiac to this day, even though they were sunk 100 years ago. So it's almost like a archaeological dig out in the Quinnipiac River. You can actually see a keel that's 100 years old, wooden keel. And the third barge that survived, the one that we have today, was brought onto land, as Joe had told us, brought onto a small inlet, if you will, and parked there. Of course, barges were shallow draft vessels anyway, so it didn't take much to create this little canal. They would slide it into place, and then they filled it in, and it sat there.
So they meant to keep it dry dock, just keep it there.
Well, dry dock is a technical term, but they meant to keep it on land.
On land,
yes.
and then they eventually made it into a bar, restaurant to get some use. You always tell me that.
Right.
If you're going to maintain or preserve a piece of architecture of the past, it'd be a good idea to have a use for it,
Right.
rather than just...
Oh, exactly.
Right.
And that was the use he found.
When my brother saw it, he was quite pleased and amazed that it was the only one that he knew of then in existence. So since he had worked and I think he was working at that time at Mystic Seaport, so he told people up there about it, and they did show interest in it. However, recently, and this project was thought of and talked about for a couple decades, and Mystic did not do anything about it because they had to spend money on the restoration of the Morgan.
That seems to be the focus,
and
the
some
Morgan.
other ships, and said that held it off for a while up until this day.
Now, the thing that's changed this, besides the fact that we've all gone up there and looked at it and talked with the marina owner, and she's been cooperative in allowing the barge to just remain there, because it's not serving any purpose other than exciting people like you, Preservation Joe and Jack. And she's been pretty cooperative about leaving it, because she could probably destroy it and have put 2 boats in that spot.
Yeah, she's a preservationist as well, and her name is Lisa Fitch, and her husband Bob Fitch, and together they own the marina, and they've been fantastically cooperative with us. But they're aware that times have changed, and they're not going to be able to pass it on to the new owners. They're about to sell it.
Is it about the marina about to be sold? Or
The marina is on the
owner?
market now, and hopefully they have some buyers, and the buyers don't want it. And we have a 90-day window of opportunity to remove this barge, which gives us plenty of time as long as we can... have a plan.
So
90 days is
my
not the night
question is,
before.
What do you have in? I know that you've been very actively seeking a way of moving it.
Yes, well, we've had a plan for quite a while. We've been in talks with Mystic. Obviously, Mystic is the creme de la creme of historic marine sites, and we would love to have them take it, and we're in negotiation, I guess is the best way to say it. But it has its own value, and we're not about to say it's mystic or nowhere. If we find a suitable home for it elsewhere, that would be just as exciting to us. Obviously, it has a little bit of New Haven history, it has a lot of New York City history, and it has a ton of Maritime history. On our conversations with Mystic, and again, not to put them on the spot, they said that they would prefer to see it saved and then turned over as a working thing. So our job is to save it and then pass it on to somebody that's going to use it.
Does South Street Seaport still, would they be a potential?
They're in some kind of troubles, unfortunately, these days, as most nonprofits are, to be honest with you. Nonprofits have hit up against a tough times, and everyone is stretched to the max with their own projects. A lot of, especially historic preservation. If you've heard President Obama talk about the infrastructure, this is basically what we're talking about. We've created structures and locations and other things that just have to be looked at after every year, and some things fall through the cracks. And if your history falls through the cracks, you're in trouble. So we're confident we're going to save the historic barge, but again, it is up to us to do.
So when you're
most of the
saying
work.
us, you don't mean just Joe and Jack Coaches, Ked Call, and Dolly Curtis.
Just Joe by himself is going to.
Shall you go, Joe? What
Didn't you ever see that red cape he wears?
Oh, the Superman cape.
Yes.
No, the historic preservation community, if you will, is widespread. It's strong. We're, as a nation, we're committed to our history. We're committed to our culture, and I see no problem with finding the people that'll want to help with this. It's a matter of A, having a good plan, and B, being able to execute that plan.
Now, what about this new thing that you talked about, the barge that you found available in Roanoke, Virginia? You said
well,
that
it's actually in Stafford, Virginia, which is 20 miles south of Washington, D.C., which some people claim is a long way to go to get a barge, but if you're looking for a particular barge, the whole world is our oyster, if you will.
So what were the good qualities about the barge that you found? You told me you found it
Well,
online.
Unfortunately, the best quality was the price.
Well, that's what you're just saying that too.
Yes.
And money's a big issue.
But what we're trying to do at this point is to make sure we have a decent plan. And our plan, in our conversation with the Mystics, they said that they would prefer to have the structure saved in a maritime environment, and then they would take it over.
What's that mean? I
they
don't
do.
know what that means.
Well, it means it's a landlocked barge 25 miles away doesn't do them any good, and it certainly doesn't do us any good, because landlocked is kind of a problem for the boating enthusiasts among us.
How do you get this to be not landlocked? I saw it myself.
Well, we have access to almost all the moving tools of the historic preservation trade, and the fact that it was a barge is pretty important to us, but it's not the be-all and end-all of saving it. We are actually going to save it on another barge, an existing barge that I found down in Stafford, Virginia. That barge is 70 feet long by 22 feet wide. This barge is 70 feet long by 19 feet wide. So we are in the process of gathering the barge. It happened to be built for the U.S. Navy in 1966, and it's about a 20-ton barge, and we're going to put our 10 to 20-ton structure on top of this 20-ton barge, and then add the restaurant equipment necessary to bring this up to modern day.
Do you need to have
restaurateur.
a captain's license to move this barge? It's on the. Who's going to move the barge?
No, the
from-
barge is actually the barge that we're bringing up from Stafford is actually a working barge. To move it over land, the Coast Guard says.
No, I meant to move it by way of water.
Yeah, to move it. It's the distance from D.C. to Fairhaven. We're kind of blessed with our location in Fairhaven because it is a marina. An 80-foot barge is considered a small barge in today's terms. Average barge is 300 feet, and some of the
Really?
barges are 500-600 feet. So it
So
depends
it's a
on.
small barge then.
It's a small barge.
But are
yeah.
you, Ken Call, going to go down there and be able to have the skill to
Well, what
start
happens
it up
is
and
you
move it up here?
when you deal with barge companies. In fact, there is a barge company within 2 blocks of this old barge. There's the Wpkn Barge Company in Fairhaven, on the banks of the Quinnipiac. Now they were just bought by the Norfolk Tug Company, which is also U.S. Waterways, and they have agreed that they'll move it for us at a reasonable cost.
Really?
And all they need is for the Coast Guard to say that it's, seaworthy, because obviously you don't want to be moving even an 80-foot barge. What normally you would move a barge in what's called the inland coastal waterways, which is almost like a canal, almost on the sea coast. It's a little bit inlet, but it's protected water, and of course it's very, very busy. And you've probably seen some articles about taking boats from Boston all the way to Florida on the intercoastal waterway. And so what the Coast Guard says, before you can go on there, you've got to have a seaworthy craft. And so we call what's called a maritime surveyor. He comes in and he does his magic and says that the barge is seaworthy. And then the Coast Guard says, okay, Mr. Tugboat owner, you can tow this barge in the intercoastal waterway. And they bring it up for us. So it's a series of phone calls. That's all it is. And this is.
But before you purchase this, don't you want to find out if it's seaworthy?
Yeah, that's.
So you don't get caught in that
yeah.
expense?
We have a guy named Randy Wren down in. He's actually, I believe, in Upper Chesapeake Bay of Maryland, but he's qualified to do this. He's certified by the Coast Guard, and we're in conversation with him. And in the next week or so, we'll send him a check, and he'll send us a report, and hopefully it'll be good. If it isn't, it's on a dry docked area, and it's available for us to get it up to Coast Guard standards. But we're assuming it is.
Do you think the fact, Ken, that the price was reasonable, that might indicate that it might have some need for repair, the barge that you're going to move it on over?
We trust the people that we're dealing with,
Okay.
hopefully, and have no reason to doubt it, but we're going to get this piece of paper. It does cost $1,000 for a survey, and,
So are you going to go for nonprofit status too?
Oh, yeah, that's another $1,000, but that's okay.
So you're loaded with money here, right?
We're loaded with money.
Yeah, we're all loaded with money
all
over here.
loaded. But, these are the things you have to do, and hopefully, in the long-term plan, we would like to see our 501c3 be swallowed by a more appropriate 501c3. Our job is to save a barge. When that's done, it's somebody else's job to keep that barge in perpetuity.
Okay, so you're just trying to get this purchased barge that's 80 foot by whatever you said up here to Fairhaven.
Right.
Now you got to move this 200-year-old oyster barge, which looks like it's probably deteriorated on the lowest part because it's been
The
sitting
very
in-
lowest part. The keel of the barge is
the
gone.
lowest part.
Right. And we're not worried about that. The keel in a barge like this would have been a 5 or 6 foot draft, so they could go right up to a dock. So we're not worried that keel is missing, because that would have been of no interest to anyone anyway. The barge we have is 2 stories. It's about 18 to 20 feet tall, and each floor, if you will, is its own little world.
This is the 1840 barge.
This is the
Doesn't it have no
1840
name?
barge.
This is just called the oystering barge. Then you got
At this point, we don't have a name of the original barge company or the original barge having a name,
Right.
but we have a couple of companies that we believe it was from. I can't.
Well,
can't
Jack
get
has
their
been
names.
expert for quite a few
Right.
decades on these wooden commercial boats. So when he spied it, he knew what he was looking at.
Right.
So
exactly.
he knows the quality of and the value to it, from the point of view that there's none others anywhere.
Right.
So that's what makes it so unique, right? Is because it's a leftover
Yes.
from 1840. And-
One thing I'm concerned about, and I know that Ken has answered this question satisfactorily, is the fact that it seems to me that the minute they put it onto a barge, or before they even get to it, that it could easily cave in, because it has deteriorated considerably since the 19th century. And it seems to me every month that we go there, there's something that seems more deteriorated more than
Over
before.
what period of time have you guys, the two of you, been
At least
stopping
20
by?
years.
20 years. I know you talked to me about it for about 5 years now. 20 years since you noticed
But
it.
we had discussions with another fellow that Lisa Fitch knows, and he's quite knowledgeable. He explained how they would have to arrange the structure so that the sides will not cave in or fall apart. I don't understand what they were saying, but Ken could explain how is it that they're so confident that that barge will not collapse once you start moving it.
Well, we get this all the time. Unfortunately, people like myself in the trade think that historic houses are like a fine wine. It's a little more valuable tomorrow than it was today, and the age doesn't scare us at all. The trade, the profession of moving structures, if you will, is well, first of all, it's incredibly technical. But we have moved.
That's why I didn't understand.
In the business, we have moved things like the Palace Theater in downtown Detroit, which is probably 2 to 3 times the size of Bushnell Theater in Hartford, which you're all probably familiar with.
Yeah, really.
And it was moved, I believe, 8 city blocks in Detroit on the main street.
How did they do
How is
that?
that possible?
Right.
How is that
Why-
possible?
With all those wires from the
Now,
top.
the aliens came and built our pyramids, so yeah, obviously it was possible.
Obviously, Ken can do it.
I mean,
It's just amazing what the technical people are. I moved personally a house about maybe 10 years ago. It was an 1840 clockmaker's house in Bristol, and the house movers, his jacks to jack up the house were all computer controlled, and it would jack up. Let's just say he had 20 hydraulic jacks under all the different beams that we had. It would jack up one corner 1/8 of an inch, jack up the next corner, and yet you would see this thing rising. Not you'd need the patience of Job to see it rising, but you would actually, instead of scrambling from corner to corner, the computer was doing this whole thing, and it was just a tiny little old clockmaker's house. But the expertise and the technical stuff that's involved in this is pretty amazing. We have an 110-foot crane, 110-ton crane, coming to actually pick up this 10-ton building. So we have a factor of 11 times the.
I mean, I'm picturing helicopters, right? Those Sikorsky's that are so strong workhorses lifting up this barge, and then Ken holding it together underneath when they pick it up.
Yeah.
I can see it being raised, but then how do they move it
Yeah.
on on rollers?
No, we're going to put slings under it. Basically, what happens is that you're going to find the beams, if you will, that hold the building together. You put a iron beam underneath that beam so that it's supported almost along the whole structure. Run 2 more of those, and then crosswise, and then you put a sling underneath the whole thing. You bring your sling up to the top of the building, and then your crane connects to that sling.
And actually, Joe, they're not too, the water is right there.
Right. And I mean, we are not moving the crane one bit. The crane is just going to swing this thing out about 80 feet because it's about 5 feet from the water. So it's being swung only its length.
So this is going to happen in the next 90 days.
Well, we're going to start the arrangements in the next 90 days. Most things take a lot longer than we plan, but we have a 90-day window to convince the new buyers that they are not buying this property with this building on it. They're buying it with it's saved for posterity, and they're going to feel good about their part in the procedure. And Joe and Jack and myself and Dolly and Lisa and Bob are going to say, we did it.
I'm going to say, holy cow.
We are going to say, holy cow.
Won't you have to pay to rent a tugboat to pull this barge from
certainly.
the south?
Yeah. It's approximately $5,000, but I found a barge in Lake Michigan that was suitable to my needs, so I called up the people and they explained. They said, we could do it, but you could never pay the freight to bring a barge through the St. Lawrence Seaway. I said, oh, how much would it be? They said, oh, probably like $80,000 in tolls to go through the St. Lawrence Seaway. Of course, then they're assuming you have a barge full of something of value, you know.
So when this happens, you're going to have quite a sight to see.
Oh, we intend to. Moving is a spectacular thing. I mean, when we've moved houses in the past, we've closed the highways and people show up at 6 a.m. when we're doing it. We had a house, not personally myself, because this is a house horror story, but they had a house in Middletown. They moved it. It got stuck in the road for 3 days. They had one in Hartford that was stuck in the road for 5 days, just about 6 years ago.
Yeah, but you can't, your barge can't get stuck in the Quinnipiac River.
No.
Well, fortunately, we've just rebuilt the Q Bridge for $1 billion, so I'm not really worried about the...
So you'll get it under the Q Bridge without any problem
without any problem.
So let me ask you, what are you going to do with 2 barges?
Well, we're going to have one barge underneath the other barge, and the old barge we're treating as just a historic building because the maritime industry is a dying craft. And while people love to restore boats, it's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly technical. Materials are usually expensive. My $15,000 barge is replacing what would cost new of $400,000.
Right.
And this barge that we're talking about was actually appraised. Let me see if I can find a date on this appraisal. Of course, appraisals are intellectual property of the appraiser, but I can use fair use to say that this appraisal was $1.9 million to replace this particular barge.
This is the one from 1840?
This is from 1840.
And what did they say?
$1.9 million.
Is it because of its historic significance?
Because of its historic significance and because of its building style. I mean, if you went to buy the beams that are in there now, if you went to buy it today, a beam that would cost, I mean, just pull some numbers out of the air, probably $700 or $800 in a steel beam would cost $2,000 in what's called an engineered beam, and that would cost $5,000 in a historically accurate fir beam that we actually have. And of course, as we're appraising this in the current day to make sure it doesn't fall apart, we check out the beams and the ribs and the different structural components of the barge and make sure they're all sound, and most of them are. and they're worth a fortune to recreate. You know, they have no value because nobody's building that way now. But
So the lumber itself has no value.
The lumber itself has no value, but a high cost value.
Right.
Like if you've ever dealt with an insurance person, and again, this is a kind of a strange trick that contractors know, but if you say that your house was built in 1920, an insurance company will value it at a lot more than if you say your house built in 1920 was renovated in 1980. And it's just a matter of the materials were so expensive back then and so hard to duplicate that if you have 1980 materials in your kitchen, you get a break. And so we work the other way around. We work the other way around.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Once you get the old barge onto the new barge in the Quinnipiac River, then what is going to be done? Where is it going? Tell us.
Then where it's going is its most suitable home. But our job is to make it as attractive to the entrepreneurs that we hope are going to take it. Obviously, our first choice is Mystic, but there's plenty. The Food Museum of New York City has a website up where they actually claim they want it. Now, I believe they might even be out of business at this time, but that's who was actually looking for
Now,
it.
what did Lisa say? Lisa said something about making a restaurant out of it and put it across the river.
We're interested in creating the restaurant, obviously, but we don't have an end user yet. We're going to make this thing as attractive as we can, and then go out and hope we have many suitors, and we'll pick and choose among the best.
But that will take time. So you said there's a time limit.
Oh no! Once we get it on the barge, we
Where are you
have
going to keep the barge?
The barge right now, we have permission to keep it on the Quinnipiac for the foreseeable future.
But not in the same area, though.
In the same general area.
Across the river?
Yeah, there's a couple of different
across
people
the river.
that have access to it. Fairhaven actually happens to be probably one of the centers of oystering in the East Coast at the time. And what was happening was that just the demand from oysters from New York City exploded. And if you go to Fairhaven section, Front Street, which is all being rebuilt by the city of New Haven, and they're doing a fabulous job. It's seaside parks and stuff like that. It's just so wonderfully reconstructed. And
that
in
was
this
the
business,
end of
we
it.
lose some and we win some. And hopefully this is going to be a very impressive win for the preservationists. And Mystic would love to have something like this if it fits their niche, if you will.
If people want to find out more about
Yes.
what you're doing, how would they do that?
Well, the best place to find out this stuff is on the internet, obviously. We have our own website. We've had it for quite a while. It's The Last New York NY. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say New York. It should be The Last NY City Oyster Barge. And that's a .com. So it's www.thelastnycityoysterbarge.com. And we have wonderful pictures of it on there, some information about it, and how to get in touch with me.